been delighted to have been invited into this session. I was very happy when Anna mentioned that they're interested in the work. Obviously it's Mary Graham's lead on the relationalist ethos. But we have been working together now for about 5 or 6 years on a whole range of projects, including setting up Future Dreaming, this beautiful organisation that we're running that brings Indigenous and non-Indigenous focus together to think through what does future governance look like and how do we share ecological knowledge so that we can be good earthlings on this continent. A lot of our work completely sidesteps all of the previous conversations in that what we're passionate about is how living organisms can continue to live and be amazing. But I think the Indigenous folks of this continent have worked that out a little earlier. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Mary discusses the relationalist ethos, but this is Michelle Maloney cribbing 2 minutes of time, and I really urge you to look up Mary's online talks and videos through Future Dreaming, Ayla and Nina, any of those websites, or just Google Mary Graham on YouTube. She has given beautiful 1-hour lectures on the relationalist ethos from the Indigenous perspective, and not just what it means for Indigenous people, but examples of what that could mean for our lives and also for the economy. So the first thing that Mary and many wonderful Indigenous friends of mine talk about is the land is the source of the law. The land is the source of the law. And then they talk about the Aboriginal map of Australia and how it is a patchwork quilt of different languages, which also represents a patchwork quilt of governance. And that for millennia, and Scotty summed it up really beautifully, for millennia, Indigenous peoples were living, working and playing in one place and interacting as autonomous groups, but deeply connected to their neighbours. There was no move in Indigenous societies that anyone can speak of towards centralisation. It was a beautiful system, I think, of people working out how to live in a place and then sharing those laws to the next generation and focusing on a collective, stable and understandable future. And again, I'm paraphrasing the wonderful Mary Graham. The relationalist ethos is basically about understanding that we come from the earth, therefore we have to give back to the earth. So the first relationship we have is with the land. And by land and country, I'm sure as Australians you will know that means a whole lot more than just the material land. The first relationship is between people and land, and then the second relationship is between people and people. Because the template of law, the things you can do and should do and mustn't do, all of these things are written through generations of understanding of how to live in a unique place, in a unique way. And the best way I can explain it as a white fella is rainforest laws for rainforest people, desert laws for desert people. There wasn't so much a universalisation of economics or law, so much as a universal understanding that we came from earth, we came from the land. As Mary says, it threw us up, we're obligated to care for it. It cares for us, we care for it. And it's exactly the same, caring for country, caring for kin. So the relationist ethos is fundamentally about building your systems up from an understanding that you're not alone, that you have support, that you are loved, and that you're interconnected with all life and all spirits and all places. And within that, then it goes much more deeply into the specific places and the specific laws. But I think one of the reasons these lovely folks asked me to introduce today by just articulating briefly what the relationist ethos is all about is if you apply it to an economic system, it kind of rules out most of capitalism immediately. Because if you're obligated to land, and you're obligated and have a moral, ethical obligation to care for the place, most of the extractivism that we see in our society wouldn't exist. And if you look historically across Indigenous cultures, yes, they had little ochre mines across a space. They had farming techniques, they had fish farms, they had agriculture. But it was always with a view for how do we take what we can here for us, but make sure there's enough for the rest of life. And the relationist ethos to me is just a beautiful way to summarise all of the good things that we've all been talking about. And what Mary talks about is these concepts of land and place as the origins of all of us. And she's got this beautiful way of explaining this autonomy and autonomous regard, which is much deeper than just respecting someone. The idea that everyone and everything has its own autonomy, and we must hold everything in autonomous regard. People's societies try to reform themselves and stay in balance. If there's change, you adapt to change, but you do have to find balance. And then these critical and variable networks, which Mary says a whole lot more about, and are deep and complex and ancient and understood, and really controlled by some pretty strong law. Who you could marry and couldn't marry in small communities to ensure that everyone was healthy and well. And so the final thing I'll say about the relationist ethos is this connection to place, which I admire so much in Indigenous cultures. And she often says, you've heard of the Descartes quote, I think, therefore I am. Mary says, if Aboriginal people had one, it would be, I am located, therefore I am. And that's all I have to say about that. And now we're moving on.
This is an economics 101 textbook. Books like these have a terrible secret. In the first chapter, you find a few definitions of economics that can be very different from one another, but the book won't say why. The secret is that these definitions, they come from different perspectives of economics. But the book itself is only written from one perspective. In Rethinking Economics, we try to teach these different perspectives, one next to the other. So those are two of our projects, so we're pushing for a new economics curriculum. But we also have one problem. Say we want to add a new perspective, say relationalist economics. Do we just keep adding more boxes and more chapters? We could, or we can rather try and understand how all of this integrates. Can you hear me like this? Yes. How all of this integrates to create this dynamic world that we live in. Because that's why we study economics, to understand the world. Why is the world currently the way that it is? Why do we have the system that we have today? So we can use a framework to bring all of this together. And that's what I want to show you. So we can forget about this book and imagine that this is you. And if you look a little bit deeper, you've got your needs, your preferences, your goals, and the system that we have today reflects who we are. It's not a simple sum of all the individuals, it's a complex system with feedback loops. So the environment also impacts your thinking. So the system, say capitalism, it doesn't have to be capitalism, but for example, that brings out our competitive nature. And this competition in turn supports the system. Now if we look on the paper, we start with environment. The First Nation people have a much better word for this. If you remember, you can write it in there, or you can have a look at that video. But fold the paper like this, because you develop with the help of this environment. So there you are, and there's the natural world, and the other organisms, and today we use this to make stuff and build stuff. So not only does the environment make you who you are, you also change the environment. And emerging from this human-environment interaction is the cultural world on the other page. There we've got stuff like social structure. It's how the self fits into the community. Is it mostly a street hierarchy, like in the West? Is it a small lateral society? Is it patriarchy, monarchy? Social institutions, it's our laws and belief systems. Government or people collectively also have this collective goal. For example, is it an empire that fights to dominate? Is it a market society that believes competition is best? Maybe market socialism that believes that they're trying to balance the market with some social support. Shared identity, think of nationality, or I am English, or I am a millennial. And later you can write in the First Nation worldview for each of these, over there, but fold your paper like this. Because collective culture here and physical environment, they reflect each other. A physical change at the top, say big agriculture, it can impact on this cultural sphere, you know? We can go from flat systems to hierarchies. And needs and habits, they start to change when you need to produce and compete to survive. And empires appear. And eventually Western culture enters the industrial worldview. And then nature gets commodified. And we make laws that go along with that. So the framework shows change over time. Now, in neoclassical orthodox economics, they focus on the need for goods and services in markets and ignores a lot of the other stuff. But communities can also manage resources and distribute responsibilities and make their own rules depending on which of those resources they manage. Governments too. And we can teach all of that from this framework. Feminist economics, they highlight that patriarchy is dominant. You can use the framework to visualize the links that result from that. And it shows us they're in the middle. To consider all needs, like the need for care not provided by markets. It also broadens our understanding of behavior. It's not just about how an individual behaves in a market. Rational behavior depends on this whole system at whatever time. Complexity economics, they use algorithms to model agents and relationships. But they still need a clear picture to base algorithms on. You can teach how money or debt develops over centuries, highlight the social aspects, trust in small communities, then hierarchical communities. Look at physical things in the environment that takes on the function of debt, like coins and cards, how technology changes that. You can map your local economy in this framework, and the donut fits perfectly on top. So to conclude, instead of one perspective or many perspectives next to each other, we can have this integral approach that sees economics emerging from a changing individual in a changing social and physical world. Thank you.
My name's Tom Foster, and thanks for Rethinking Economics Australia for inviting me to present today. And so, as Dennis mentioned, we have the orthodox, or also known as the mainstream or the dominant economic theory of our times, which is called neoclassical economics. It's mainly the macro and also microeconomics. The key assumption of neoclassical assumes resources are infinite. So that means that it has foundations in an infinite number of planets, for example, Homo economicus, where humans are self-optimising, rational people and men, and the markets really dictate human behaviour. So in talking about relationship economics is really about what relation does this create with our world, how we see our world. And I think most people are familiar with this type of image, with the economy at the top and people, government and the planet servicing the economy. What relationship does that create between us socially and politically? Where does it put our hierarchy? Well, it puts these people at the top and we kind of, praying to them. The outcomes, well, unlimited growth, and as of yesterday, unlimited happiness, according to Dr. Andrew Lee. Competition and contest, busting through our planetary boundaries, and neo-colonialism, global north and south. So it provides a justification, intellectual justification. So let's go to heterodox, which Dennis also covered, which is more evidence-based. In terms of ecological economics, it recognises fact-based, evidence-based. Resources are finite. Clearly, we have one Earth, one planet. People are complex, we're social, we're interconnected, and we need to respect the laws of physics, not the so-called laws of economics. And how does that relate? Well, here we have our planet at the top, and the economy should be serving us. And the planet, our biosphere, not the other way around. So I think, people are here familiar with this type of paradigm. And this creates this kind of social and political hierarchy. A lot better picture, I think, is in our democracy. Resulting outcomes, well, we can have degrowth, our steady state, cooperation, collaboration, and more balanced resource and needs between us and all humans on the planet. But it's only half the picture. So if we go back to our friend here, neoclassical, it also assumes that money is finite. At the heart of this is the barter myth, the barter story. I'm talking about this tomorrow, by the way. We started with barter, but then we created money and then credit. And this led to an assumption that money is a scarce and finite commodity. That in turn leads to assuming that money is a creature of the private sector and of markets. What's our relationship? What's a similar relationship? By this, we see the private sector and the markets as the top, and we're basically competing for those finite commodity resource of money. It also puts these guys back on top. We're handing out the dole, it's because they created it, and then we all fight for that money. What's the outcomes of this? This is trade-offs. There's not enough money. We trade off things between lack of money and where we put money. And this leads to some of these justifications: austerity, unemployment, interest rates rises, we've seen, Wall Street, financialisation of our economy, and neo-colonialism, and putting global south countries in debt. And of course there's no alternative to this according to neoliberal philosophy. Or there could be communism, and everybody of course knows that that's even worse, so you've got to put up with this. So, modern monetary theory is a heterodox. It recognises that money is infinite. It's based on the evidence based of historical and archaeological evidence of what money is. And it leads to a recognition that money is actually a creature of the state. It's not the private sector. We have a relationship now where money is a societal tool. Its public purpose is for us to use, and the private sector is we feed them, not the other way around. And that leads to a difference in the social and political hierarchy. It basically depowers the billionaires. Resulting outcomes from this is there's no trade-offs in terms of financial bonds. And so we can be talking about instead just transitions and debt jubilees and so on. Still have option one subs, but this, of course, is a big threat to the. So we've done, lots of paradigm shifts. This requires 2 paradigm shifts. We've already done this, with Copernicus. So the first one we need to do is resources are infinite. We need to go to resources are finite, and then we need to have a second one, which is money is finite, money is infinite. We need to create 2 different paradigms for the previous century, a conservative neoliberal and a future progressive paradigm. And these are 2 symbiotic paradigms. They're self-reinforcing. So there's new courses released by a partnership between a not-for-profit modern money lab and the Torrens University of Australia that AQF recognised. There's no prior formal economics qualifications needed or study, and I would recommend for all activists in the progressive scene today getting on board with, and we have people like this who you'll be studying with. We have Stephanie Kelton as an adjunct professor, and Fidel Kaboub, a Tunisian American who is currently doing a lot with neo-colonialism, educating Africans about that area. Lecturers across the board from modern monetary theory. Pauline Schneider there, who's just co-written a paper with Jason Hibble, where students from the world. We'll leave that. So thank you.
We are one.